Would leaving the European Union be worth it? Hello everyone and welcome to Hungary and Beyond. If you find this kind of analysis useful, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Hungary joined the European Union 21 years ago. At the time, it was widely described as a historic return to Europe. For many Hungarians, EU accession symbolized stability, prosperity, and a final break from the uncertainties of the post-communist transition. The dominant feeling was optimism, the belief that Hungary was entering a better, safer, and more predictable future. But more than 2 decades later, the question is no longer emotional. It is practical. What has EU membership actually delivered for Hungary? What did the country gain? And what did it give up along the way? And looking ahead, does EU membership still make sense in its current form? Today's episode looks at those questions through the lens of a critical Hungarian legal and economic assessment that weighs costs and benefits across agriculture, industry, investment, ideology, and geopolitics. Let's start with the price of accession. EU membership was not automatic nor painless. Hungary spent nearly a decade in negotiations, during which it accepted strict conditions to align its economy with EU rules. Some of the most visible costs appeared in agriculture and industry. At accession, Hungary agreed to sharply reduce its sugar production quota. The government at the time gave up most of the country's allowable output, and compensation was paid by the EU. But the result was structural. Sugar factories were dismantled, equipment destroyed, and by 2008 the domestic sugar industry had effectively disappeared. Today, even basic byproducts used in food production are imported. Other agricultural sectors struggled as well. With the opening of the single market, Hungary saw a surge in food imports, often cheaper and produced at scale in Western Europe. Domestic producers faced intense competition. During the early post-accession years, Hungary's agricultural trade surplus fell sharply, and many smaller producers were pushed out. The same pattern appeared in textiles, light industry, mining, and heavy manufacturing. EU competition rules limited state aid, removing a protection that many Hungarian industries had relied on during the transition years. Sectors like steelmaking, chemicals, and mining, already weakened by privatization, could not compete with Western European firms that had stronger capital bases and newer technology. Entire regions, from northern Hungary to former mining towns, experienced long-term job losses. The energy sector also underwent rapid liberalization. According to the analysis, Hungary was not institutionally ready for full market opening in electricity and gas. Long-term contracts were terminated under EU pressure, and this led to costly legal disputes and compensation payments to foreign-owned energy companies. At the same time, tax policy and investment incentives lagged behind regional competitors. The claim is that Hungary missed out on substantial foreign direct investment in the early years after accession, only later correcting course with lower taxes and targeted incentives. So that's one side of the ledger: real structural costs, especially in traditional industries. But EU membership also brought significant financial inflows. As a poorer member state, Hungary became a major net beneficiary of EU funds. Over the years, the country received far more in cohesion, agricultural, and development funding than it paid into the EU budget. The net balance has historically been positive by tens of billions of euros. These funds supported infrastructure, agriculture, local development, and parts of industry. EU money also contributed meaningfully to GDP growth. By some estimates, at least 1/5 of Hungary's economic expansion since accession. EU membership also opened access to the single market, with nearly 500 million consumers. Exports rose sharply in the years following accession, and foreign investment accelerated. Multinational companies established factories, logistics hubs, and service centers. Employment increased, and unemployment fell significantly compared to pre-accession levels. Today, foreign-owned companies employ roughly a quarter of the Hungarian workforce and dominate exports. But this leads to a more complex question. Who benefits most from this growth? The analysis draws on research by economist Thomas Piketty, who has argued that in Central Europe, foreign-owned capital extracts substantial profits that are repatriated to parent companies in Western Europe. In Hungary's case, profit outflows have been particularly high compared to other Visegrad countries. During some years, outgoing profits reached several percent of GDP, significantly more than in Poland or the Czech Republic. The key argument here is not that foreign investment is bad. On the contrary, it brings jobs, technology, and stability. But it does mean that a large share of value created in Hungary does not remain in Hungary. When profit outflows are compared with incoming EU funds, the picture becomes less straightforward. In some years, profit repatriation by foreign companies has exceeded the value of EU transfers. That said, this is not the whole story. Foreign firms also raise wages, introduce new technologies, build supply chains with local small and medium-sized enterprises, and improve export capacity. Many have established research and development centers in Hungary. These indirect benefits are difficult to quantify but very real. So economically, the conclusion is mixed. Hungary has benefited from EU funds, market access, and investment. At the same time, it lost entire industries, became highly dependent on multinational firms, and sees substantial profit flows leave the country each year. Now we come to the political and ideological dimension, which has become increasingly central. When Hungary joined the EU, the Union was widely seen as a technocratic, economically focused project. Over time, however, the EU has taken on a stronger ideological character, particularly around social policy, governance standards, and political conditionality. The author of the original article argues that this shift has created growing tension between Brussels and certain member states, including Hungary. Today, a significant portion of EU funds allocated to Hungary are suspended or delayed due to rule of law disputes and political disagreements. Roughly half of the funds earmarked for the current budget cycle are not fully accessible. This changes the financial calculation. If Hungary receives fewer EU funds, while profit outflows remain high and budget contributions increase, the net economic benefit of membership shrinks. Not necessarily to zero, but enough to raise serious long-term questions. There is also a broader strategic concern. Hungary's economy is deeply integrated with the EU. More than 3/4 of exports go to EU markets. This brings stability, but also vulnerability to Western Europe's economic cycles and geopolitical position. The argument presented is that Hungary should hedge its bets, maintain EU membership, while expanding economic ties with non-EU partners, including Asia, the Middle East, and the Global South. So where does this leave us? The overall conclusion of the analysis is not that Hungary should leave the EU today. Economically and geopolitically, membership still provides net benefits, but those benefits are declining, and the conditions attached to them are becoming more political and more contentious. The key question, then, is not about the past, but about the future. Can Hungary use its remaining time and leverage inside the EU to build stronger domestic industry, higher value-added production, and more resilient supply chains? Can it reduce dependence on profit extraction while preserving openness to investment? And can the EU itself adapt to internal diversity without turning financial tools into instruments of political pressure? Because if the balance continues to shift, the cost-benefit equation that once justified EU membership may no longer look the same. And that's the question we'll leave you with today. At what point does EU membership stop being a strategic advantage? And what should Hungary do before that moment arrives? If you haven't already, Subscribe to Hungary and Beyond for analytical conversations about Hungary, Europe, and the wider international picture. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.